Hello, my name's Edwina Archer and I'm the funding lead for Active Derbyshire and Active Notts. And for this session, we're going to have a look at Sport England's new Community Emergency Fund and how to complete the application form. Before we have a look at the application form, I think it's important to note that Sport England's assessors are looking to turn around applications as soon as possible. So they've suggested they're going to turn around applications within 10 working days. So as a consequence of this, they're not going to have enough time to get back to you if they've got any queries about your bid. Also, you can only apply to the fund once. Therefore, it's really key that when you complete your application form, you include as much information as possible, which can help the assessor understand why it's important for your organisation to receive this funding and to help them make an informed decision. Also, at the time of recording this session, and it's the 7th of April today, the online application form has to be completed in one go. So I'd really strongly recommend that you print off a copy of the form. So if you go to the web page that details all the information about this fund, towards the bottom, but before you get to the button which takes you through to the online form, you can see where you can download a copy. I've recorded another short session which gives an overview about the fund, and this can be found on the Active Notts or the Active Derbyshire websites or on our YouTube channels. However, just as a quick recap, the fund provides grants of between £300 and £10,000 apart from in exceptional circumstances. We're now going to have a look at the application form. The application form is split into 4 sections. So the first 2 sections are about your contact details and the details of the organisation. The third and fourth sections are probably the most important for the grant assessor to get an understanding of the financial needs of your organisation during this current crisis and to get an understanding about the sort of work that your organisation does. So I think the first 2 sections are quite self-explanatory, but please do get in contact with me if you're uncertain about anything, and I will try and help. Therefore, we'll move straight on to the funding section on the form. So we'll start at looking at question 23 onwards. We'll have a look at questions 23 through to question 26. So think carefully about how much funding you need from Sport England and make sure that it is a figure that you can justify. So I would recommend that if you've got access to your finance files for last year, have a look at the sort of expenditure that was incurred in terms of your running costs from the period 1st of March through to the 31st of July. But also think about whether there's been any inflationary or price increases since then. So the sort of expenditure that the fund can cover includes rent, utility costs such as gas, electricity, water, telephone and internet costs, insurances, facility or equipment hire, core staffing costs, but those costs that can't be covered by other grant funding that's been made available through the new funds that the government's launched. Also think about the cost of sessions or activities for this year where you've had to cancel but you've still incurred costs which haven't already been included in your calculations. So include your calculations in this answer in question 24 and the total within question 23. But also have a think about including in your answer to question 24 the impact of any actions you can take to reduce this financial impact over the next few months. Then think carefully about lost income during the period from the 1st of March. Now this is an important question, particularly for those organisations that raise the majority of their income during the spring and summer months to help tide them through the autumn and winter. However, irrespective of whether that applies to your organisation, I would recommend that you have a look at your accounts where applicable from last year, but also think about those figures in the context of this year if the COVID-19 crisis hadn't happened. So you might have to need to make some adjustments to those figures to account for perhaps changes in membership numbers, changes to the number of activities or events, or changes to the charges that would have been made and why. So think carefully and include your calculations in this answer in question 26 and the total within question 25. We'll now have a look at questions 27 and 28. Now, question 27 is about your organisation's reserves. Now, it doesn't matter if your organisation has reserves. It actually shows Sport England good governance, and they have said that they won't penalise applicants for having reserves. They stress that all well-run organisations should have reserves, but the question helps their overall assessment of the organisation's situation. So for the answer for question 28, it's worth identifying where there are restricted reserves included within the total and why they remain restricted at this time. So for example, if you're funding from other grant sources and the funder hasn't changed their funding policies to allow more flexibility during the current period. So detail how you've made the calculation within question 28 and the total within question 27. So that brings us to the end of the funding section and leads us on to the related information section. So we'll now have a look at questions 29 and 30. So question 29 asks you to describe the work of your organisation and who in the community takes part in your activities. Now, Sport England are particularly interested in certain priority groups. So they're interested in organisations that deliver activities in disadvantaged areas, including areas of rural deprivation. They're also interested in organisations that work with one or more of the following groups of people. So they're interested in organisations that work with women and girls, disabled people, people that are on lower income, Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups, LGBT+, older people, or those people with long-term health conditions, and or organisations that are maintaining an element of self-employed workforce that's not covered by any other government funding. So looking at question 30, they asked you to briefly describe the activities of your organisation and what it's delivered over the last 12 months. So obviously describe those activities. Think about the project sessions you delivered for the community during that period with regards to sporting activities or physical activity, especially relating to those target groups that we've just mentioned. Also try to include participant numbers, outcomes, but I also think it might be worth mentioning here if you've been working with either ourselves here at Active Derbyshire or Active Notts or other organisations such as Street Games or Shift. So I think it is worth mentioning that in this section. So Sport England is aware of our work in priority areas and with priority groups, as they are with the work of, for example, Street Games. We'll now have a look at questions 31 through to 33. So question 31 asks how you're staying in touch with your participants during this current closure period. So that could be anything from simple social media just to keep your participants, your members informed, right through to whether you've been one of those organisations that's been able to deliver some sort of online activity. Question 32 then asks what would be the consequences if your organisation is not successful in securing this funding. So Sport England's interested in how you've demonstrated the consequences of not receiving this funding and how this will impact on your organisation's ability to deliver sport and physical activity, particularly with reference to those audience groups that we named earlier. So for example, women and girls or people with disabilities, etc. So link the answer to this question to those beneficiary groups named earlier. The final question then asks whether there's any other support or guidance that would help you during this period. Over the last few weeks, we've seen grant funders changing their priorities in terms of reacting to the current COVID-19 crisis. So as we're coming across new funds, we're adding them to the funding news streams on the Active Notts and Active Derbyshire websites. We also send out regular funding newsletters. So during this time, we've been sending out funding news alerts regarding these new funding streams that are addressing the COVID-19 crisis. So if you'd like to subscribe to one of the funding newsletters, just go to the homepage of the Active Notts or the Active Derbyshire websites. Thank you for listening. I hope you found that useful. My contact details are listed here, so you can contact me either by email or via telephone. Thank you for listening.